Joining me now is Ben Wittes. He's, of course, editor-in-chief of Lawfare and an MSNBC legal analyst. Mr. Wittes, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
All right. In your most recent post on Lawfare yesterday, you said this story is likely to get worse for individual one, referring to the president.
That's President Individual One to you.
That's right. Okay. Why do you believe it's going to get worse? What is, and when you say it's worse, is it worse as far as what we know privately, or worse in that what we're going to learn publicly?
Well, so as we were going to go to press with that story last night, literally minutes before, BuzzFeed News dropped the latest revelation in that story, which was that, they had contemplated creating a $50 million penthouse for the president of Russia in Trump Tower and giving it to him.
Right.
And so, when we woke up yesterday morning, people did not know. The public did not know. And actually, there hadn't been any leaks to this effect, or we hadn't found out that Michael Cohen was going to plead guilty that day to matters related to Trump Tower Moscow. By the end of the day, he not only pled guilty, but we had a next set of revelations about it. And so I think you should start with the assumption, as you said in the introduction, that there is a great deal that we don't know here. And the fact that we don't know it doesn't mean it's not serious, and it doesn't mean we're not finding it out tomorrow.
One of those fun blind quotes that sometimes they're blind quotes, meaning they're anonymous, so take them for what it's worth. And Gabe Sherman's piece in the Vanity Fair seemed to indicate that people close to the president were rattled by Cohen, didn't know it was coming, didn't know that revelation was coming. They knew the Manafort stuff, they knew some of this other stuff, but this blindsided them and has them worried that Mueller some say, did Mueller entrap the president in those written answers?
Look, it is not entrapment, and it is not a perjury trap to know more than you tell the person that you're interviewing, who is obliged under the law to tell the truth. That is something that prosecutors do all the time. And by the way, if they didn't do it, they would be idiots. Mueller is not obliged to warn the president, by the way, here are all the things I've done in preparation for this question. It's the president's job to answer the questions truthfully. Right. Now, people do have memory lapse slips. People do remember things differently from one another. And so, no, I'm not making an argument for tricking people.
Right.
But that's a different thing from an expectation that the president's lawyers seem to expect, that Bob Mueller's going to warn them, by the way, I know a whole lot more than you think you do, than you think I do. Not the way it works.
You're a legal expert. Our job is to deal with the politics of this. In this Trump Tower deal, one of the president's defenses is, well, there's nothing illegal about what I was contemplating.
He's right.
But he was hiding it because he knew it would be a political problem if it was known at the time, as I was pointing out earlier. Did Michael Cohen, did you find any new legal problems for the president?
Okay, so there's at least two and maybe three distinct issues there, right? One is there anything on its face illegal about the Trump Tower Moscow deal? At least as described in the criminal information yesterday in the Cohen case, no. I think it's describing a kind of gross deal and looking for, support from a hostile strongman in an adversary country. There's nothing obviously illegal about that. As Ruth Marcus pointed out in your last segment, if you're talking about giving a gratuity of $50 million to the president of a foreign country, that will raise some eyebrows under a statute called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But we don't know the details of that. I don't see anything obviously illegal in that. There is a second question, which is how much more is there than what is in that document? And my working assumption is there's probably more to it than Mueller gave out yesterday. The third question is, has everybody been honest about it? We know that the answer in Michael Cohen's case is no, because Michael Cohen pled guilty to lying about it yesterday. We know that the president was asked about it. We don't know what he said in his written answers, so we can't evaluate that yet. And we don't know who else was asked about this in a forum in which they would be obliged to answer, and precisely what they said and how it interacts with those facts. So I think there's at least three big questions there.
Sarah Sanders today talked about a probe that she hoped was coming to an end.
It was supposed to end by last Thanksgiving, too.
Rudy Giuliani has been out there, Ty Cobb before him, who was the president's lawyer before Rudy Giuliani. They've always talked about, well, this was, we got another 6 months. Maybe it's another 3 months. Maybe we'll get this done by the end of the year. There's one person that's never put a timetable out, and that's Mr. Mueller. I look at everything that's happened in the last 10 days, and I think, there's no way he's going to have a report ready to file to anybody in the first quarter of next year, let alone by the end of this year. Why should we believe that Mueller is anywhere close to wrapping up?
So there have been certain signs of winding down, and I don't think those are trivial. On the other hand, there is pending litigation about grand jury matters that presumably means the grand jury is still active if those litigations are still active. There are cases that we all expect are going to materialize. For example, the special counsel sought a plea deal with Jerome Corsi and seems to be investigating Roger Stone. This doesn't look like winding down.
Right.
And then there's this whole obstruction side, which is supposedly going to end in some kind of a report. I don't think anybody should be talking about what the time frame on any of that is. It's going to end when it ends.
Before I let you go, I was going to wrap, but you brought up Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone. Jerome Corsi is probably the person that did more to create to spread the false allegation that a dead DNC staffer was somehow involved in the hack. He actually now knows that he knew something in advance. So he knew that he spread a lie that he knew himself wasn't true. Is he now legally vulnerable on that front for spreading misinformation about Seth Rich and from his family?
So I don't know the answer to that question for a variety of reasons. And one of them is that, you'd have to know, first of all, there's a civil liability question.
Right.
But
seems like he's opened that door is wide open.
Well, I think I think on that, if you sort of maliciously spread false information.
This is malicious. This is provably malicious, it appears.
Right. So I think there are certain civil liability questions that would certainly come up there. The question on the criminal side is, did he do anything in the context of that in which he was obliged to not be lying, right? As a general matter, lying is not a criminal act, right?
Especially if we in the press would be suing our guests all the time.
Hopefully not me.
I hope not you either. Mr. Wittes, always good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Friday. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.